This is a Dark Magazine podcast. I'm your host, Nalini Haynes. This podcast was recorded at Robinson's Bookshop in the Glen, featuring Ilsa Evans' new book, Family Baggage, launched by award-winning author Anna Snoekstra.
Before I hand you over to our authors, I would just like to tell you a little bit about each of them. Anna is an award-winning author and screenwriter. She lives in Melbourne, where she writes from an old football factory in the back streets of Thornbury. Is that still right? Yes. She's the author of Only Daughter, Little Secrets, The Spite Game. Her novels have been published in over 20 countries and 16 languages. She's written for The Guardian, Meanjin, Lindsay, Lit Hub, and had a short fiction published in the Saturday paper, The Griffith Review, and her latest novel is over there, Out of Breath. So please feel free to buy one this evening when you buy Family Baggage. Ilsa is a critically acclaimed author who has published 15 novels. Is that correct?
It's 16.
That's 16. Somebody on one side it said 17. So it was a guess. Across a range of genres, light fiction, short stories, to memoirs, murder mystery and young adult. 2 of her previous novels have been shortlisted for the David Sisters in Crime Awards. As well as writing, Ilsa also teaches creative writing, writes social commentary, and has been published in several newspapers and online journals. In 2011, she received the Eliminating Violence Against Women Award for online journalism. We're excited tonight to be talking to Ilsa about her latest book, Family Baggage, which a few of us here have read and absolutely loved. So I'm going to be very interested to hear a lot more about it tonight. Please make them welcome.
Alright, so as we meet here today to celebrate stories and storytelling, I'd like to start by acknowledging traditional owners and first storytellers of this land, the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung and Burrung people, and we'd both like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, emerging, and extend this to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that might be here today. So yes, my name's Anna. I'm very, very excited to be here to be launching Ilsa Evans' newest novel, Family Baggage, with this beautiful, beautiful cover. Ilsa's such a fascinating woman. We heard a little bit about her life, but there's just so much more that could be said. Like, I know that she served in the Air Force and the Army Reserves. Amazing. She studied medieval history, which is just so interesting. Yes, also does this amazing work working in higher ed around domestic violence survivors, and won the Eliminating Violence Against Women Award for online journalism, which is just such an incredible, incredible thing. Another thing that I learned about her is that she just got back from Antarctica. I mean, how many people can say that in their lives? I just think that's incredible, and I can't wait to hear more about it. So somehow, amongst all of those things, she's managed to write all these novels to the point where people aren't sure how many there are, because there's just so many of them. People, if they write one novel in their life, feel proud, but to have written as many as you is just unbelievable, and you're still going. And I'm curious to see what the tally will end up being. So 15, but now, as of today, 16. Woo! Fantastic. We're here today to celebrate the 16th novel, Family Baggage, which I found to be a wise, authentic, multi-layered exploration of family and grief. But saying that, and when I wrote that, I thought that makes it sound very serious. And it is serious in a way and deals with some really serious themes. But the way it's written is with this beautiful light touch and with these real laugh out loud moments. So I think that is such a hard thing to pull off, that kind of intersection of sadness and hilarity, and you do it with such grace and ease. It just feels so right when you read it. So yes, I really encourage you all to pick up. So the novel starts with 83-year-old Enid on her deathbed, and we're going to get a little sneak peek of this scene. She looks around at the faces of her children, and she's kind of going over the things in her house she wishes that she could, which we'll hear what those are, and they're quite interesting. Of course, all of those things are discovered as her 3 daughters sort through her house, which exposes many secrets and truths along the way. The novel focuses on the middle child, the middle sister, George, who's also a writer and higher ed teacher. if any percent. And she's the first to find her mother's diary, and what she reads connects to her own life in so many ways and makes her kind of really rethink who she is and what she wants. I don't want to tell you too much of what happens in the plot because I want you all to buy it. I'm very excited to ask some questions, but I thought a great way to start off, just to kind of really for you to get a sense of this beautiful voice of the novel. If you don't mind reading just the first little bit, that would be fantastic.
Not a problem. I shall read the prologue, which gives you a really good idea of where the book goes to from there. But before I do, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Robinsons. For anyone who's read the book and anyone who's about to read the book, the display behind me is so on point. They have taken everything that from the book, the apples, the towels, the Lego, the Monopoly, everything is from the book, which is just absolutely amazing. And a huge thank you to Robinsons for that. Okay, so I'll read you the first part of the book and then we'll launch into a couple of things about where it came from. Enid Tapscott was dying. She knew this with a certainty that felt congealed within, thick and visceral, like marrow itself. The odd thing was that she felt removed from it all, as if the inevitability of her dying had robbed the concept of power. Instead, she was utterly relaxed, her blood warm, limbs heavy, mind deliciously foggy. Enid thought she hadn't felt this tranquil for years, certainly not since the 70s anyway, when for a brief period of time she had floated through life on a cloud of weed. Even if awareness of her own imminent demise hadn't been curled within, it was easily discerned from the attitudes of those around. Fatalism wafted into miasma that hung from the ceiling like mist, the hushed voices of the nurses, the shiny-eyed solicitude of the children, and especially the sudden appearance of her mother. This last had been a dead giveaway in every sense of the term, as her mother had been cremated nearly half a century ago. Yet there she was, superimposed on the IV drip stand, gazing beatifically down on her daughter. Clearly, death had done wonders for her personality. Under normal circumstances, as in when she wasn't busy dying, their defeatism would have irritated Enid. But then, she supposed, if she wasn't dying, it wouldn't be an issue. She blinked slowly, trying to unravel this philosophical enigma. Soon it too drifted away. Her mother sighed. It was the soundtrack of Enid's childhood. She wondered if at some point her life would flash before her eyes. Maybe it already had and she'd missed it. Typical. It would have been a short feature anyway. Childhood, marriage, motherhood, death. Hopefully reincarnation was actually a thing and she got another shot. Her mother sighed again. It occurred to Enid that she was being judged not on a lack of achievements, but on the detritus left behind. She wanted to explain that she'd had no warning, otherwise she would have spring-cleaned the house and scrubbed the casserole dish from last night's stew. She would have done that load of washing. She would have also pre-purchased one of those funeral plans, chosen the songs, anything but Amazing Grace, pre-recorded a stoic goodbye message and written her own eulogy. She would have put together a will, and she most definitely would have burnt that old diary, destroyed the letter hidden in her wardrobe, culled her memorabilia box, and discarded the vibrator nestled amongst her sensible white underwear. Actually, she probably would have thrown out the underwear also. Soon people would literally be rifling through her smalls. But Enid had been given no warning. She'd been fit as a fiddle until 6 o'clock last night. She knew the exact time because the ABC News had just begun, and she'd been standing at the kitchen bench with a cup of tea, wondering, as she did most evenings, where the past 83 years had gone. After that, her memory was less clear. The cold of the kitchen tiles throughout the long night, the rubbery feel of her face, then disembodied voices and the smell of the ambulance, all leading up to this state of rather delightful laissez-faire consciousness. She could have done without her mother's presence, though. After all these years, it was probably time she told her that. She opened her eyes, but instead found the view blocked by a fleshy face, millimetres away, every pore magnified. Enid recoiled, making a noise somewhere between a gasp and a gurgle. The face immediately pulled back, blurring and then elongating into a body before separating into two more, like a triple exposure. Enid blinked, trying to focus. Realisation blossomed. These were her daughters, the ties that tether, the sorter, the settler and the sook. Not that she'd ever use those words out loud. She tried to smile, but the corners thickened within her cheeks. And now she could also see her grandchildren standing over by the wall, and her eyes darted along the room. There he was, curled in an armchair in a corner, head down, her son. Enid's gaze softened. She willed him to look up, but understood why he could not, how hard this must be for him. Enid dragged her attention back to his sister. She felt a rush of urgent energy and for the first time fought against the inevitable march of death. She needed more time. She needed to tell them to watch out for their brother. She needed to extract promises. He was so vulnerable. She ran her tongue around her mouth, moistening it in preparation. But the words congealed even as their faces merged back into one and then slowly faded. Soon all that remained was a soundless smog of colour and light. Her mother's sigh was a feather-soft breeze beckoning her towards the darkness. And she realised ruefully that she'd simply waited too long. It was over, the story of her life.
Am I right in thinking that that was the original title of the book?
It was. Yeah, that's right. It was the story of her life for a long time. Not a single one of my books, and by the way, the number is totally my fault. I keep getting it mixed up and people will say, and I'll say 14, and then I'll say 15, and then I've got to actually sort of count them. But I've never had a single book that the title that I've come up with has carried all the way through. So obviously I'm not too bad at writing, but I'm absolutely rubbish at titles.
I think that's a great title, The Story of Her Life.
I thought so too, thank you. Thank you.
Levels with the daughter and the mother, so yeah, that's good. But I didn't pick up until we just read it then. It's sort of like the final sentence. So yes, my first question, I guess, going way back to when you first started this book, or when you first had that kind of spark of an idea for this book, and it can be hard because sometimes it's multiple things, but I'm curious for this book, where did it begin? Where was that original spark that kind of nestled in your brain and then ended up resulting in this very thick book with lots of elements to it?
It's a really interesting question. I think all of my books start with the situation and then the character, except for the sequels like the murder mysteries. The sequels, obviously, the characters are all there and they carry forward, which they're lovely to write because everyone's already fully formed. But with this one, I think it actually started with the death of my own mother 8 years ago. And for anyone who's been through that, and I'm sure a few of you have, it's like a grenade's been lobbed into your life. And it exposes fault lines within families, I think, also. So things that have been just sort of brushed under the carpet and then suddenly the carpet gets too lumpy to walk across. So, you know, even the most solid families suddenly go through this, it can be really quite complex. And I think in the wake of that, I wanted to do something with what we'd gone through as a family. And I also, I suppose, had a masochistic desire to give it to somebody else. So if you create a world, you can give, and I've done this with a few of my books, you can give the angst to somebody else. So the incident, I knew even back then that I was going to write about it eventually, because it was actually quite cathartic as well, I think. Not that I write for that reason, it's not memoir, it's not, you know, it's not, I'm not setting out to have something that's going to be therapeutic for myself, but it's a happy accident when it happens. So then the characters had to come after that, and they were probably more difficult than the situation, because I did borrow quite heavily from that period in our lives. But the characters, I had to be really, really careful because they had to be incredibly fictional because I'd borrowed so heavily. So I didn't want the family drama to become suddenly you know, melodrama because of me and the story that I was putting down on paper.
Yeah, so interesting. Yeah, it's such a hard thing because you can't help sometimes but draw from your own experiences and your own life. But at the same time, I think that comes with so many ethical issues and obligations. So, I mean, can you talk us through how you navigated those obligations and ethical issues when taking some of those real experiences and putting them into this book? And you've got to be careful, maybe there's people that you borrow from.
Actually, I was just looking around to make sure there wasn't. I don't think so, so I think we're pretty safe. That's a really great question, and I think it's a question that a lot of authors have grappled with because it sort of comes down to who owns stories. So something might happen to you, for instance, and I'm not picking on you there, you just happen to be sitting there, and then it's your story, but it also might affect people in the, around you. And so they might be telling the story from their perspective, and so they feel they have a right to tell it from their perspective, but it's still your story. Yes, and it can be incredibly difficult. And I remember quite a few years ago, obviously more than 8 years ago, because this story is about my mother, I wrote a short story, I wrote an article about an incident that had happened in our family. And as a result of that, I got asked to be the ambassador for Dying with Dignity, which I was incredibly proud of. And, it was a way for me of turning what had happened in our family into something that was positive and, something that I could do, I think, for me. Anyway, my mother rang me up after she read the article before it went to print and asked me to change it. And it was an incredibly difficult thing for me to do, because for me it was really personal, it was my story, but it actually did affect her more, and I had to acknowledge that. But I really resented it. I did do it, I changed the bit she wanted me to change, but I really resented it. And I remember on the television there was a male author, and I can't remember who it was, quite a famous one, and he had done some sort of memoir where he told a story that happened in his family, and the story had fractured the family. And he said every author has a right to do this. I don't know that I agree with that. I think that that's a bit simplistic. Obviously people in his family had felt really, really hurt by what he'd written. I don't think anyone has a right to do that. I think it's it's something that you negotiate. I mean, I've got a great friend at work who told me a story that her family had left Afghanistan, the most amazing story of what her mother did to get the children out. And I asked her if I could use it in a book one time, and she said yes. And that's great, because I will use it, and I've got her permission. I'll put her in the acknowledgements, and I feel really comfortable with that. In this case, I did send it out to various members of my family to make sure that the characters were enough fictional. But I still think I ran a bit of I straddled a fence a little bit at times there.
Yeah, it can be really hard. But sometimes when you do go into places that you feel that discomfort, you can end up with something that feels just so honest and true, like you said. So I think it was worth it. So I'm curious, in that little bit that you read out, you mentioned the three sisters, and I think it was the sorter, the settler, and the sook. How did I say that one? And that kind of comes through within the book a few times, this idea of siblings playing different roles, being assigned different roles. And so I'm curious in what you were trying to say about that, why you're interested in that, and also if you have a role that you're assigned.
That's a really interesting question. I think there was a sociologist who said that we were all prisoners of our roles, so that our upbringing was sort of really gave us a bit of a script for where we went in life, and as much as you tried to change things, it was very difficult to shake that free. And I think that's true in a lot of ways. And I think that's where I was playing around with the sorter, the settler and the sook, because even though they didn't see it, and they were quite offended when they read that in the mother's diary, we, the reader, could see that they actually did fit those quite neatly. But, the big question is, did maybe their mother create that by identifying with them that way? Or did she see something that she then wrote about? And I think that's a really interesting question. As for me, I think I have three sisters, and I was probably what was called in those days the tomboy of the four. I was desperate to be a boy. I used to fantasise about growing a penis overnight. I was no children. That was up until I was about 5. Can I say I did get over it? But I was so desperate to be a boy, and I think that's what probably sent me into the military, that and failing a trick, but that's beside the point. So I think that was a role I was really proud of, but it was more probably because it made me different in a family of girls. And I think it gave me a point of difference, it made me closer to my father, all that sort of thing. And also, I've got a phobia of ribbons, so luckily there's no one with ribbons in there. I actually legitimately have a phobia of ribbons. I can't handle bows. So There's actually a name for it. I did look it up at one stage, and it's a really long name, but it actually has got a name. I mean, like, they're just, I don't know, they're sort of slippery and slim. But anyway, that's beside the point. I'm going right off track now. But I also didn't like dresses much, but I don't have a phobia about dresses. I have the ribbons, yes, dresses, no. But so I dressed always, and short hair and everything, so that was my identity. I don't know whether it was my role. I think it was just my point of difference more than anything else.
And how long were you a tomboy for?
I think there's some ways I probably still am to some degree, but I don't think we use the term anymore now. I think back when I was growing up in the 70s, we were a lot more gendered with what we did with our children, and so that was me sort of fighting against that. Whereas I think now, I mean, I've got 1.5 grandsons. 1.5. So the 3-year-old, I love the fact that he is so, he'll turn up with, I mean, he's addicted to cars and trucks and things like that, but he'll have a clip in his hair, or he'll wear a tutu. He wore a tutu to his parents' wedding. You know, I just love the fact that the kids now can sort of go in between those roles, and they're perfectly comfortable with doing that. And I've forgotten what your question was.
I was just curious in how long it lasted. I think you're spot on. Yeah, these days you don't have to push back so much against it. I was a massive tomboy as well. I wasn't afraid of ribbons, so that's so funny. It's so interesting. But yeah, so talking about, we've mentioned a lot about how many books you've written. It's quite a lot, as you know. But I was curious, as someone who has written so many books, and I know some of them were short stories and young adults were a little bit different, but a lot of them are adult novels as well. And maybe this question's just for me, but does it get easier as you go? You know, and how is each book its own beast, or do you find your rhythms? What's it like having had a massive amount of experience of writing novels?
I think, well, I'm significantly older than you, so I've had more time to do it. I'm an incredibly lazy person. I really, really am. I just, like, I like doing nothing. I like watching Netflix. I like all that sort of thing. But I also like writing, otherwise I wouldn't do it. I'm just not, my work ethic isn't good enough for me to do something that I don't like. And I think I like almost the power in it, so that when you're creating fiction, you can create these entire worlds, and you can populate them, and you don't have a lot of power over real life. It just happens. Whereas in the, I wrote a series book a few years ago, and from the very beginning, there were 2 characters that were going to die off, and then right towards the end I changed my mind, and I was able to do that. I was able to save them from the brink of death. And you can also do some fun things like revenge type things. One of my sisters was really annoying me one time, and so I wrote her into a book and gave her 4 sons. And then I made her pregnant with twins. I mean, another time I wrote my ex-husband into a book and then tweaked his sexuality somewhat. So there's a lot of things you can do with books that you don't have that power in your life at all. So I think I enjoy it thoroughly, and I think I'm as surprised as anybody when I realise that I've written 16 books. It's just because I never set out to do that. I think I set out to, do it as a bit of a hobby and do one. And in fact, there's a lady here tonight, Mary Ann, who I was playing midweek tennis, and I had the manuscript, which had been knocked back from a few publishers, and it was in the boot. And I dropped Mary Ann off at her place and got her tennis stuff out of the boot. And she said, "What's that?" And I said, "Oh, it's just a manuscript. I'm trying to write a book." She said, "Oh, give it to me." And by the time I got home, she'd already rang me saying, "Where's the rest of it? That's so good." And that, I think, is what you just need, that sometimes that bit of encouragement. And I thought, okay, this is readable. It's not just me. And so, but that was probably, 23 years ago? Yeah. So I'm quite sure by the time you're my age, you'll have done You know, you'll be sitting there 25. I'll come out of retirement to interview you.
Yeah, I mean, people have different approaches as well. Some, like Donna Tartt, she's written 3 books set to 20 years every time. And then Stephen King, I mean, I was trying to figure it out. He's in the 50s, how many he's written.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think, you're quite right. I mean, when I see somebody who's taken, I think it's all about process too, because the first 20,000 words or so I find really difficult. It's like drawing blood from a stone. And my house is never so clean because I'll take any excuse not to write. But then from that point on, I don't want to do anything else.
Yeah.
So it's all I want to do, and the other work that I do, it really gets in the way. That's all I want to do is write. And that's where I am with the next book. So I've had to put it aside while I'm doing all this because otherwise it's too difficult.
Yeah, exactly. And I really want to ask you about that book. And we are going to open up to questions after I do ask you that. So just get your question all ready in your head. So book 17, so you started it. Is Antarctica going to feature?
No, it's not. But I will write about it at some stage. The cartoon who I went to Antarctica with, I can recommend it to anyone who's ever thinking about doing an Antarctic. They don't call it a cruise, they call it expedition. But there was cruisy elements to it. Oh my God, the most amazing trip. It was just fantastic. The next book, though, is about a siege in a chemist. So it's just some characters, one from Family Baggage and one from Avery Conifer. I like to reuse my characters. They just happen to be in a chemist at a given point in time and they get taken hostage. So it's about the siege as it unravels and unfolds. I'm having a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, I bet. And that's also like kind of almost a sequel, a half sequel.
No, I wouldn't call it a sequel at all, actually. It's just me being lazy again. So I like I'm not sure if in this one, but in Avery Conifer, there was a couple of characters that popped up from a murder mystery series that I did years ago. So I like to sort of have characters pop up in weird and wonderful places. So it's totally different, but it just uses the characters.
Yeah, awesome. And that means that anyone who's read your whole backlist, they get rewarded with these little pops of other characters.
Absolutely. I hadn't really thought of it like that, but I mean, I think it's more, it's like meeting old friends and you want to catch up with them again and sort of see where they've gone to in the meantime.
It's so hard to let them go. So, yeah, that's a good way to do it. I will open up to questions. Does anyone have any questions at all? Yes.
I'm not familiar with your works yet, so I'm just wondering, a lot of authors say they're writing a story, and the character, they have no idea where it's going to go and how it's going to finish, but the characters take over and write themselves. Have you experienced that at all?
Yeah, look, I think that's a really great way of describing it too, and because to me, I know they're not real. I mean, I'm not living in delusion land. I know they're not real. I've made them up. But I mean, if I'm writing a character who's having a romance with someone, I usually write a guy that I would go out with, or would have once upon a time, because I want to identify. So absolutely, the characters become so fully fleshed that sometimes where you thought the book was heading, you suddenly realise, no, they wouldn't do that. So that's, I find that all the time. And it'll be really frustrating sometimes because you think that was a really good ending and now I can't do it because they've gone in a different direction altogether. So they do take over in a way.
Fantastic. Is there any other?
How did you decide George would be the main storyteller in the book?
That's a great question because I don't know that I ever did. I think the characters changed so often with this one because I was so worried that it would be close, that someone would identify with them because I had used these elements of, what happened to my family 8 years ago. So, Annie at one stage was the older one and then she was the youngest and then, they would change, there was a bit of husband swapping going on too because at one stage the different one had the different husband and all sorts of things. When they settled, though, it just sort of made sense that George was the main narrator, and then I was going to swap it from character to character, which I've done with a few books, but then I thought, no, I want to take a break from that because Avery Conifer was like that, and so is the next one. So I thought, no, I'll stick with the one all the way through. So I think George just sort of put her hand up. It's like what you were saying before, it was almost like she put her hand up, and I didn't want to write from Annie because Annie was probably my least favourite, though I did feel sorry for her. And yeah, George was the one.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Go for it.
I actually haven't read any of your books yet that I know of. I found previously that when I said that, I then looked through and I read some. You prefer different genres. Is there one that you prefer more? Or?
Probably this. I love taking social issues and then using humour, not for the issue obviously, that's a serious thread that goes through it, but using humour along the side. And that's probably my favourite. So I've done like young adult, and I've done murder mystery, and I've done the serious ones, and I've enjoyed all of them. But yeah, I keep coming back to the fiction, and I love to, you know, when you do write, you've got in the background social issues, and people will, you know, email and say, well, I identified that happened to me, and that was great to see it in print, and I think that gives me a real buzz. Yeah, it's really, really humbling actually. It's really great.
What would you call this kind of genre?
I don't know, because I hesitate to use the word light fiction because it's not really, I don't know that it come under that, and I hate the term women's fiction because it's so, you know, narrowing. So I don't know.
I've heard life lit, which I quite like.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't mind that. I hate chick lit.
Yes, I know.
Oh, so demanding.
And yeah, that's just not what it is.
No, and I don't think, I mean, I didn't, you know, I remember years ago, probably second book, I think it was, and the publishers asked me to do an interview with a radio, and when I picked up the phone and they said, can you tell us about chick lit? And I'd never heard of the term, so I was can I just say the interview never went ahead because it was obviously dead in the water, because I go, what are you talking about? I've never heard of it. And they're saying, well, why do you write chick lit? Do I? I mean, like, what is it?
No.
Awful term.
No, it is. It really is. Any other questions?
Just a comment. I love my characters in a new book because they're like little Easter eggs for me. And then I go, oh, must read the other series again. Must do it. It is so fun to read the books and help it as a character that comes up.
Oh, I love that you've said that, because I do it like for my own pleasure. So it's so, and often I wonder whether people have even picked up. But I love it.
Oh, sorry, will everybody hear the question because we got.
Oh, sorry, I'll repeat the question. So what was your name?
Helen.
Helen. What's your? Oh, I think I know. You're.
Yeah.
Yes. Hello, Helen. Yes, I've seen. I was about to say your surname, but I thought maybe you're incognito, so I better not. Do you live in Emerald?
I do.
Yes.
I used to.
Yes. I'm Helen from Emerald. So Helen from Emerald has just said that she loves the fact that the characters pop up like Easter eggs. Does everyone know what Easter eggs are? I didn't know that until about a year ago. So in films, if there's a little allusion to another film, it's called an Easter egg. No, I hadn't either. I'm trying to think of an example. So, like in Toy Story, they might have an allusion to a Stephen King movie or something like that. And most people don't pick up on them, but they're called Easter eggs. And there's a lot of moviegoers who spend their whole time looking for Easter eggs and they put it online. And Helen has just said that they're like little Easter eggs when you find a character that's from an other book. And I was saying how much I love that because I do it for my own pleasure. So to know that, sometimes I think nobody picks up on it. So it's wonderful to hear that. Thank you so much.
I love it. It is. And then I go back and read the books again.
Oh, well, that's even better.
Even if I don't have it, I go, find the library.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
There you go. I was accidentally doing something clever.
Amazing. We might do just one final question if anyone's one, and I'll repeat it as well.
It's quite random, and I've used this whole.
Do you want me to come down there? Hang on.
Sorry.
presenting a new book, even though you've done quite a few, do you have that moment of how will this go? Like you're putting yourself out in the form of a book. How do you feel internally when that's all coming about?
Oh my gosh. It's like sending one of your children out into the world, to be honest. So, yeah, it can be really nerve-wracking because until you get the first reviews back, you really don't know how it lands. And I mean, I know that sounds silly because when you think I've had 16 books published, I mean, I should have an idea, but you don't. You really don't. And you're sort of addicted to Goodreads and places like that for the first month or so, and I'm sure Anna identifies. And then if there's a slightly negative review, you know, did they even get what you were doing? And you concentrate on that one. So it is quite nerve-wracking, I must say. It is really like sending, you know, I suppose putting a piece of art on display or sending your offspring out into the big wide world to be criticised or not, as the case may be. But fortunately for me, thus far, knock on wood, the good reviews about, I mean, there's always people who don't like your work, and I mean, I don't like some authors' work. I mean, I picked up something, I'm not going to say what it was, a couple of weeks ago that won a prize, and I go, what the hell? So, you know, absolutely, you're quite prepared for that, but yeah, it's raw, it's very sensitive.
Especially because you put so much of yourself and your heart into the work, and then you're putting it out there for people to judge. It's a very brave thing. So I guess, do we have time for one more? Yeah, one more.
Just wondering how long it took for your first novel to be published or picked up. How long did it take for your first book to be picked up?
Oh, great question.
The question was, how long did it take for the first book to be published? The boot book.
Yeah, the very first one, which don't buy the early ones, they weren't very good. I'm serious. It's all right, HarperCollins didn't publish those. It was a while, it was a long time, and I think I didn't know what I was doing, which didn't help, and I sent it out to publishing houses, and then I realised you're supposed to get an agent, so I sent it out to agents. So I'm trying to think how long it would have been. I think probably I made the mistake also of sending it out before it was finished. So I'd read somewhere you send out the first 3 chapters, and I thought that meant you just wrote the first 3 chapters. I didn't realise you meant write the whole book and then you send out the first 3 chapters. And so those first 3 chapters, by the time I finished it, so what publishers were getting was very different from what they first got it. So don't do that, anyone who's looking to get published. And probably 20 years ago, I'm really quite jealous, I think, of anyone who starts out now. There's so many more resources online and so much more support online and so much more advice. I mean, I really had no idea what I was doing. And then Fran Bryson of Bryson Agency, which is closed down now, a lot of my publishers or agents fall in love and go overseas. So beware. I know you're happily married. But yeah, so that's what happened with Fran. And the next agent as well, can I say. So yeah, it has been a bit of a pattern. But she took me on, and I think that was probably the bit of a breakthrough. But a couple of years it would have been. A long journey it was back then.
Any other questions before we finish up? Well, thank you so much. So Ilsa's going to be here signing. So everyone needs to buy a copy to get it signed. It's so special when it's signed.
Oh, the Neenish tarts. That's what I was going to mention.
The Neenish tarts.
Has anyone actually finished the book? So you'll know about the Neenish tarts reference then. So I actually brought some Neenish tarts, and those of you who don't, you'll know when you read the book, you'll go, that's why that interesting addition of Neenish tarts.
Yes, so there's 2 plates of Neenish tarts. 4 plates of Neenish tarts. So extra curd. You can only have one in one. But yeah, I'd love to have a round of applause for Ilsa for
Thank you, Robinson's Books.
This podcast was a broadcast of Ilsa Evans' book launch for Family Baggage at Robinson's Bookshop in the Glen. This has been a Dark Magazine podcast. I'm your host, Nalini Haynes. Thank you for listening. Stay safe and have fun.